So it's a delight to introduce our speaker this morning, Reverend Greg Jones, who is our community minister, and he's spoken to us twice before for those of you who have been here before or who are new. Reverend Greg is a UU minister and staff chaplain at the Gundersen Health System here in La Crosse. He graduated from Andover Newton Theological School in 2019, earning a Master of Divinity degree with a specialist certificate in Spiritual and Pastoral Care. After doing some other things, he completed 2 years of chaplaincy residency at Gundersen before beginning his service as a staff chaplain. He draws inspiration from humanism, religious naturalism, and the Tao Te Ching. He believes the entire universe is sacred. He is also known to consult the philosophical tenets of Star Trek and the wisdom of Yoda. Reverend Greg?
Thank you, Amanda. It is so nice to be here this morning. I love the spirit of this fellowship. I think I've shared with you before that I'm now a member, and it's good to be part of this community. It really is. So, this, by the way, is my chaplain's uniform. Although I don't always wear a turtleneck, but I never wear a tie. So I decided to dress appropriately this morning as I was sharing some things from my chaplaincy work. During the summer of 2016, while I was attending seminary in the Boston area, I participated in my first unit of clinical pastoral education, or CPE, which is the training program in pastoral care required of all those preparing for Unitarian Universalist ministry, and also for those preparing for chaplaincy. The hospital where I served was Boston Medical Center, which is the safety net hospital for the greater Boston metropolitan area. As a safety net hospital, Boston Medical Center provides care to anyone who shows up, regardless of their ability to pay. It's the facility that serves the city's unhoused and undocumented and incarcerated residents. During my training, I encountered innumerable new and unexpected situations and people. I was stretched in ways that often pushed me well outside my comfort zone. I had amazing and sometimes deeply sacred experiences that have remained with me to this day. I performed emergency baptisms, administered sacraments, and prayed with families as someone they loved was taken off life support. On a couple of occasions, I sat at the bedside of patients who were all alone, without family or friends, holding their hands as they drew their last breath. Those are moments one never forgets. One of those encounters was memorable for a different reason. Over the course of 2 weeks, I had been visiting a patient who I will call David. David had end-stage renal disease, meaning that his kidneys had failed. He required regular dialysis to stay alive. During my first visit with David, he talked about how difficult it was to be dependent on dialysis. A few days later, he told me, "Chaplain, I can't do this anymore. I'm tired. I'm weak. I can't go on. I've talked to my doctor, and I've decided to stop dialysis." Now, for someone dependent on dialysis, stopping those treatments inevitably leads to death, often after just a few days. David gave me the name and phone number of a woman he knew named Sarah. He asked me to call Sarah to advise her that he was nearing death, which I did. And she, in turn, called the only family member David had, a son, Ben, who lived in Los Angeles. David and Ben had had a stormy relationship. David had been an absent father, and when he was present, was often angry and abusive. Ben, for his part, had been a problem child. As soon as he graduated high school, he cut off his relationship with his father. He moved out and resettled as far away from his father as he could get. Ben stopped speaking with David. There was always bitterness, and often there was rage. Ben had not spoken with his father for almost a dozen years at this time, and now as he was dying, David held out hope that he could see his son one last time. But Ben responded angrily to Sarah's call. That SOB caused me so much grief. The only pain I've known has been when I stay away from him, as far away as possible. I have no intention of seeing him now. Let him die alone. When David heard that Ben would not come, he was stunned. He was despondent. Realizing he would die without reconciling with Ben triggered deep, deep regret. The pain was written on his face. He died 2 days later. As an observer of this situation, I was also stunned. When I shared this experience with my CPE supervisor, she introduced me to the work of Dr. Ira Byock. Dr. Byock is a palliative and hospice physician who treats patients who've been diagnosed with terminal illnesses. He helps prepare them for the final days of their lives. Over the years, Dr. Byock has treated patients who've been able to navigate their last months and weeks with grace. They have tended to their relationships with the people that they love, the people in their lives, and have said their goodbyes in ways that allow them to leave well. He's also treated patients who, like David, have become estranged from their families or friends. For whatever reason, they are alone, angry, and bitter. They don't leave well. Their departures are painful, if not physically, then certainly emotionally. Through his work, Dr. Byock has found that there are 4 simple phrases that, when spoken between dying patients and their families or friends, have broken through relational logjams. They've led to powerful and transformative reconciliations. He calls these phrases the 4 things that matter most, which is also the title of the book in which he's recorded stories of healing and reconnection. It was the book that my CPE supervisor recommended that I read. His 4 simple phrases are these: please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you, and I love you. Now, as a full-time hospital chaplain, I often see patients and family members grapple with the difficulty of disconnection and estrangement. I've observed situations in which no one really knows what to do or say because they haven't spoken for a long time. And at the patient's bedside, there are often periods of silence, punctuated maybe by stiff jokes or comments that seem less appropriate for the circumstances. And occasionally families default into the behaviors that are most familiar to them and either give each other the cold shoulder or end up in shouting matches. However, I can also affirm that in the times patients and their families actually have used the 4 phrases, their final days together were markedly better than what they had anticipated. And that got me thinking, why should the power of the 4 phrases wait for someone's last days? These are words that can break open hard hearts and melt icy cold shoulders. They are, in fact, words for life, for living, in addition to dying. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you, and I love you. Let's look at those a little closer. The first thing that we notice about the phrase, please forgive me, is that it's an explicit request, directed to the other person in the conversation. Interestingly, no one is saying, "I'm sorry." There's no apology. Dr. Byock writes that apologizing engages only one person in the relationship. When someone says, "I'm sorry," it's a statement, not a request. While a request for forgiveness might be implied technically, the second person in the exchange is not being asked to do anything. If that second person says, "I accept your apology," or "I forgive you," that's a good outcome. But when an apology is made, sometimes it stands alone, and it's not dependent on how the second person responds. On the other hand, when I say, "Please forgive me," I am explicitly asking for an active response on the part of the other person. To ask another for forgiveness is to expect a response. In the most embittered and challenging situations, that response might be, "I'm sorry, I cannot forgive you." But by prompting the other to actually do and say something, the power of the words are revealed. I say, "I cannot forgive you." To say, "I cannot forgive you," demands that the one responding, the one being asked to forgive, must wrestle with the response. The emotional and the moral weight of the phrase, "I cannot," or perhaps even "I will not forgive," is unimaginably heavy. It's a weight borne by both parties in the exchange. And holding a grudge requires much more effort than letting something go. And thus, by explicitly requesting forgiveness, we facilitate reconciliation by affirming that the other is capable of forgiveness, and by making the act of forgiving the easier and the better option. The second phrase, "I forgive you," likewise does not ask for or expect an apology. The offer of forgiveness is not contingent. No matter what you do, you cannot take away from me the power of my forgiveness. Those two phrases, the request, "Please forgive me," and the declaration, "I forgive you," reveal a deep truth about the nature of forgiveness, which is that the benefit of forgiveness is experienced as much, or perhaps even more, by the person doing the forgiving than by the one being forgiven. To forgive is to break open what Dr. Byock calls a locked heart. A heart gets locked when it's been wounded. Unlocking a hardened, wounded heart breaks down the wall of blame and bitterness that may have been built up between the offended and the offender. Blame and bitterness are easy and effective if the desired outcome is to keep another person at arm's length, away from sensitive, hurting self. The problem is, over time, layer after layer after layer of protective calluses are laid over the wound. Eventually it stops hurting, not because it's healed, but because it's been anesthetized. It's been made numb. To forgive one another, then, is to open the windows of the heart and to welcome a fresh breeze. Please forgive me. I forgive you. And now, thank you. In her best-selling book, The Gifts of Imperfection, Brené Brown describes how she used to think of gratitude as an attitude. We've heard that saying, have an attitude of gratitude. Like most folks, she believed that gratitude was an emotion. I have gratitude because I feel grateful. But one of the most profound insights that she's gleaned from her research is that gratitude is actually an action, not an emotion. Gratitude is a practice. When I say thank you, the word thank is a verb, not a noun. And you are the object of that verb. I am thanking you because you have done something worthy of my thanks. Dr. Byock writes that in his medical practice, he's learned that people at the end of life desperately want to be reassured that as they live their lives, they've made a difference. I would add that I think all of us at all stages of life want to hear that we've made a difference. And so saying thank you is perhaps one of the few things we do in which repetition and redundancy are good. Sometimes it's okay to state the obvious. Meister Eckhart, the 14th century Christian mystic, wrote, "If the only prayer you say in your whole life is thank you, that would suffice." Dr. Byock notes that practicing gratitude by consciously identifying the ways others have given something to us makes us more mindful of our own lives. By practicing gratitude for others, we rehearse and improve the ways we identify the good in ourselves. One of the ways that Brené Brown recommends for practicing gratitude is to keep a gratitude journal. She describes how some of her research subjects have committed themselves to identifying and recording at least one thing each day for which they are grateful. She goes on to say that the practice of gratitude cultivates joy, and joy is an emotion. It's a feeling that can be nurtured to grow within us. We can learn that we have more joy today than yesterday, and that our capacities for joy are beyond measure. Our list of the 4 things again. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. And I love you. Many people have difficulty saying, I love you. I occasionally hear someone say, of course, she knows I love her because of all the things I do for her. Or, of course he knows I love him because I've faithfully provided him for his entire life. Yes, love can be implied, just like forgiveness and gratefulness can be implied. But like gratefulness, with love, it's important to state the obvious, and then to state it again and again and again. Once more, when it comes to saying I love you, repetition and redundancy are very good things. One of the saddest characteristics of families where there's been abuse, whether it's alcoholism or drug abuse or physical abuse, is that family members often have great difficulty saying, I love you. In many cases, children don't hear their parents say, I love you, until mom or dad have had a couple of glasses of wine or a cocktail. And for brief moments, parents can act and speak in loving ways, but then after the 3rd or 4th glass of wine, they either become abusive or they pass out. It's a situation that confuses children and puts them on an emotional roller coaster. Among many families of Scandinavian and German origins, like many of those we have around here, like mine, it's been hard for folks to say, I love you. The difficulty is cultural. In many families, love is assumed and implied, but rarely spoken or demonstrated. A while back, one of my cousins married Susanna. Susanna was a woman he met in California who was from a Mexican family. And while some Mexican or Latin families are just as restrained and stiff as Scandinavians and Germans, Susanna fit all of the stereotypes of someone who is demonstrably affectionate and never tires of saying, I love you. One day, I noticed that when she was with her nieces and nephews, she revealed a wonderful way to coach the kids to say, I love you. As she hugged one of the little ones, she would say, I love you to the moon and back. After a few times, when she said that, she would look at the child and ask, do you love me? Yes, the little one would say. But the children didn't also add the words, I love you. If they didn't, Susanna would ask, how much do you love me? Auntie Susanna, I love you to the moon and back, which was inevitably followed by tight hugs, slobbery kisses, and lots of giggles. Where the words I love you seemed awkward and uncomfortable, I love you to the moon and back was easy and fun. So we've come full circle. We've looked at the 4 things that matter most that Dr. Ira Byock had identified in his medical practice with people at the end of life. And looking them over, we see that they are not just words and phrases for the dying, but perhaps even more importantly, appropriate and valuable as words for living. Words to live by, to learn, to live into. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. And I love you. And so now, say them with me. All together. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. And I love you. And how much do you love? I love you to the moon and back. Amen and blessed be. May it be so.